Hey folks, welcome back to Ken Michaels Radio, and a big thanks to all of you who subscribe to my channel. Here on my channel, we talk Beatles, and we talk to everyone from musicians to fellow podcasters, anyone who's a lover of the Beatles, authors. We all talk Beatles here on my channel. And we have a special guest who was just on my channel recently, John Borack, who is a writer and editor for Goldmine Magazine. He just recently put out this new book, which we covered in our previous show, called The Beatles 100, 100 Pivotal Moments in Beatle History. Back in 2010, he also wrote a book on John Lennon called Life is What Happens. And he also is a musician, which we didn't talk about when he was on the last time. And he's a drummer. He's in several bands. And just recently, he wrote an article on Ringo Starr in which he listed his 10 favorite drumming performances from his days in the Beatles. So I thought we'd talk about that and maybe revisit that book of the Beatles 100 right after that. Welcome back, John Borack. Hi, John.
Hi, it's great to be here, Ken. Thank you.
Now, before we start, let's just let the folks know that, as I said, you are in several bands, one of which is a Beatles tribute band, correct?
Yes, playing a Beatles cover band called Let It Be, and we play in and around Orange County, California. So I get to fulfill my lifelong dream of playing a lot of these Beatles and solo Beatles songs that Ringo played on. It's just, it literally is a dream come true for me as someone who grew up drumming since the age of 8, learning how to play by listening to Beatles songs in my parents' garage and trying to play along. It's kind of a fantasy fulfilled, so it's really cool.
Were you always drawn to the drums?
Always. I was probably 7 years old, and when I was young, I had an extremely large belly, even larger than it is now. And I would walk around, or so I was told by my parents, I would walk around banging on my stomach, keeping the beat. Since I didn't have a steering wheel, I couldn't drive yet. I was 7. Banging on my stomach, and my dad told me one day, "You are embarrassing the heck out of me. I'm going to buy you a drum set." So he got me a used Ludwig silver sparkle kit one day. I wish I still had it. That was back in the late 60s, early 70s. And that's when I started playing, just self-taught.
Well, there's a lesson to be learned there. Just embarrass your parents, and then you can have your first drum kit.
There you go. There you go.
So the other bands you're in, I know that you're in one called Pop Dudes. And,
yes, Pop Dudes is a cover band. We've recorded several tracks. There's actually a CD that came out called Maximum Rock Stupidity, tongue in cheek. That came out with my third book, Shake Some Action 2.0, a guide to the 200 top power pop albums. So that CD came out along with that book. And that actually included a lot of McCartney covers on it. I think we covered Listen to What the Man Said, Coming Up, Live and Let Die. So we do a lot of Beatles in that band. And then I play in a band where we do mainly originals called the Armoires. And we had an album come out recently called Incognito. A lot of fun, really proud of that one. We play in and around LA and also played up and down the West Coast as well. And then another band I'm in, Test Pressings, where we do 70s covers. So the 70s AM radio stuff like Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes and Wildfire by Michael Murphy and all that kind of fun stuff.
All my favorite music.
Oh, yeah. I love it. That's what I cut my teeth on, that and the Beatles. So, yeah, so I play in a lot of different bands. But, for our purposes here, of course, being in Let It Be, the Beatles cover band, is paramount to what I do right now.
Yeah. There's a lot of music that I personally love, but the music of the 60s and especially the first half of the 70s and what was on the top 40 charts, I just devour that stuff. All that some people like to make fun of, the lightweight power pop stuff and the Have a Nice Day music, that's among my favorite music. So I'm glad you're keeping that going as well.
Oh, yeah. Early 70s AM radio stuff, early 70s soul.
Yep.
The stylistics, the spinners, any of that kind of stuff. I just Eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Love it all.
You're speaking my language there. So you wrote an article, as I said, on Ringo and what you feel are your 10 favorite drumming performances in the Beatles. So I thought if we could, and we've had some technical problems trying to capture the drum sound here on camera, if we can manage to do it, we will try. But let's talk about these songs that you list and why they're important to you and among your favorites. And the first of which is one of the most obvious ones you could pick, because Ringo has often cited this as being his favorite or one of his favorite moments as the drummer. And that's on the song Rain, where he did say he felt like he was possessed at that moment. What is so special about Ringo's drumming on that song?
Well, on Rain, it's sort of unlike anything he had attempted previously. There are a lot of drum fills throughout the song. It's almost one long drum fill. And it's really cool. He's all over the kit. He's all over the floor tom. He's especially on the rack tom. He's like you mentioned and like he mentioned, kind of a man possessed. He's just doing stuff he had never done before, playing in a way he had never played before. He's actually mentioned, I never played that way before or since, but he sort of did play that way not long after that when the Beatles recorded She Said, She Said, because it sort of has that similar vibe where there's a lot of drum fills and, he's really coming back to the hi-hat quite a bit as opposed to the crash cymbal. So it gives it kind of a whole different feel and, something a lot of bands back then weren't doing. The drummer would pretty much just play a solid beat. You listen to stuff like I'm Henry VIII I Am by Herman's Hermits, and it was a, really simple stuff. But, on Rain, Ringo was everywhere. I mean, he was using the crash cymbals, he was using the hi-hat, as I mentioned, all over the toms, just one long fill. And the way that record was produced, the drums were really mixed a little bit up. George Martin put them up in the mix a little bit, so it makes them even more vibrant. Just really great performance.
You're reminding me, just recently, Ringo gave an interview to Rick Rubin, and Rick was asking him why his drumming got so much busier later on. The drumming on Rain is nothing like, Please Please Me, for example. And I want to ask you that very same question, because Ringo likes to talk about, the art of drumming is what you do in the fills, and usually when you're in the pocket, which is another way of saying when you have this space, like at the end of a musical phrase or something, that's where the drummer can add an accent and do something interesting to make the song interesting. But why on a song like Rain would he be continuously playing the way that he did?
I just think it was what he was feeling at the time. And, who knows if there was a little bit of, if there was some psychedelics involved. Because there certainly were drugs involved in the composition of the song when John Lennon wrote it. It's possible that Ringo was just trying to do something different, because one of his trademarks is that he was so inventive. And if you listen to almost all the Beatles songs, he's never really playing the same thing exactly on any track. He's always evolving. He's always doing something different. So I think, by the time 1966 came around, around the Revolver era and just before, they were pushing the envelope, musically, and they were looking for new sounds. And that wasn't only John, Paul, and George, but it was Ringo as well. So I think, I'm guessing, of course, but hey, let's try this, and then he did those fills, and John was probably, yeah, keep it up. That's my take on it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting in a way, because to me, one of the beauties about Beatles music is that the songs are so strong. You're concentrating on the songs, sometimes singing along with them. And you would think that you wouldn't want the backing tracks to be so busy and so distracting that might take away from the song. And it's very easy, especially in this day and age when we live with isolated tracks. If you want to check them out, you just want to zero in on Ringo's drums at times, or Paul's bass, or a specific element of the song. So where do you draw the line between playing just enough so that it's not taking away from the song itself, or just doing whatever you can to make the song as interesting as you can.
Well, it's obviously a delicate balance,
Yeah.
and achieving that delicate balance is easy if you're a Ringo Starr. It's not so easy for other drummers. But if you're Ringo or Charlie Watts, Keith Moon, you know when to go crazy, you know when to hold back.
Mm.
And Ringo always played, and he said this, he always played to serve the song. So, Rain was a little bit out there, and so he played a little bit out there. Again, pushing the envelope, evolving, just doing something different, trying new sounds. The drums on Rain, and then, a little bit later that year on Revolver sounded, just the sound of them was unlike anything that the Beatles had ever attempted before. Very compressed drum sound, and just really, really cool. And it almost turned the drums into another lead instrument without being too overbearing.
Interesting. Yeah. Just explain, because you mentioned how Ringo would end his drumming on Rain with a hi-hat, and why that made the song so different as opposed to playing a cymbal.
Yeah, he would end a lot of the phrases, or he would go back and forth as part of his fills. He would use the hi-hat as part of the fill. And if Zoom was cooperating now, I could demonstrate that a little bit for you. But in a way,
We
I'm
could
glad
try it.
Zoom is,
We could try
well,
it if
in
you
a
want.
way, I'm glad Zoom is not cooperating, because there's no way in hell I can play anything close to what Ringo Starr played. I can certainly try to emulate it my best, but it's a little bit difficult to try to do that. I can give it a shot if you'd like, but
Okay, it either works or it doesn't.
yeah, but I can say before that, in that, usually ending a musical phrase, the drummer will end on the crash cymbal, and then, go back to the hi-hat for the verses, of course, depending on the song. But, Ringo was, he was using, I don't know if you hear that or not, but he was using the hi-hat sort of in the middle of a fill as almost another drum on Rain, and he played with it open a little bit, so it had a really cool sound.
Hmm. All right. So some of the songs that you listed were actually early Beatles songs. And one of them, well, we'll go to the soundtrack of A Hard Day's Night for Tell Me Why, which is such an exciting song. It's such a great groove all throughout, and kicking in with Ringo's drums the way that it did. Why did you in particular cite this song as a favorite?
Well, as you mentioned, it's a really exciting song. The whole, from the beginning to end, and it's hard to believe the song is not even 2 minutes long. I mean, there's a lot of things packed into that song, musically speaking. And Ringo's drums are just off the chart from the opening, the opening fill again, unlike anything he really ever attempted with the Beatles. And it's just insane. And then going into the coming out of the bridge, which is, I think, John doing the falsetto vocal on the bridge. It's Ringo doing his patented, really, really fast triplets and quadruplets, or whatever they're called, on the snare and the floor tom at the same time. And you have to have really, really supple wrists to be able to do that. I can't do it. I can do it on one drum. I can't do it on both drums at the same time. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of skill to be able to do that. But, on a track like Tell Me Why, I'm not sure how many takes they did, but, Ringo just pulled it off without any problem at all. It's pretty amazing to listen to.
Yeah, I've had a few guests talk about Ringo doing that. In particular, Billy Amendola and Greg Bissonette, especially on the song "Help," where with both
Yes,
hands, he's playing. Are they 16th notes? I'm not.
I think they're 16ths. Yes.
Yeah, but in unison at the same time, and strong, and playing them so strong in both hands,
Right.
and it's difficult to do that actually.
Oh, it's very difficult to do it. Whenever I play Help with Let It Be, going into the chorus, it has that little, the 16th notes. I just do it on the snare only. I can't I can't do it on both. It's a really difficult thing to achieve.
Yeah.
And Ringo's gotten a lot of short shrift over the years. You've heard all the naysayers, and oh, he was lucky, and he wasn't even the best drummer in the Beatles. Ha ha ha. Yeah, that's all BS. you know,
Hmm.
Ringo might not have been the most technically proficient drummer around, but he served the song. He could groove like nobody's business, and he was a timekeeper extraordinaire. And there's a quote from George somewhere. Playing without Ringo was like losing the fourth wheel on a car. Ringo drove the whole band, and it all stemmed from him. And the amazing thing too, to me, is if you listen to a lot of the live stuff from '63 through '66 when they were touring, Ringo couldn't hear. He couldn't hear what the other. He would look at the rear ends of John,
Right.
Paul, and George to see where they were in the song, and just the fact that he could even stay in time, not being able to hear the vocals or the guitars, it's just amazing. But he was pretty amazing drummer.
Yeah. I think would tell me why before they go into the last verse, those are triplets that he's playing in both hands, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So that's different from Help. But the thing is that it's the coordination of the two hands simultaneously playing the same thing so precisely and in perfect time, you know?
right. And that was one of his calling cards. He could do that. One of the other songs we're going to mention. Well, maybe I should wait until we mention "I Feel Fine," but
Okay.
another one of his calling cards on that song too.
Yeah. How important is it to you for the timing to be so precise? Because even Ringo has said it's only natural if you're human, if you're excited about a certain song, you're going to speed up a little bit. Is there anything wrong with just being human and not being absolutely perfect? I think, most of
Well,
us appreciate songs like that.
sure, as long as you don't, speed up and slow down too many times within the same song, then it sounds a little strange. But if you listen to the Beatles live recordings, as I know you have, and I'm sure most of your
Mm.
listeners have, uh, a lot of the stuff they play is faster than it was on the record, and I think that's part of the excitement. Part of the excitement of the crowd, part of the excitement of playing live. A lot of the Hollywood Bowl stuff, for example, it's a lot quicker tempo than you found on the records, but the tempo never seemed to vary within the song, and that was what Ringo was great at, was just holding down the beat and keeping it steady for the rest of the band.
Yeah. One song that you listed, which might surprise a few people, is Act Naturally.
Yeah, another one of Ringo's great strengths, and I mentioned this earlier, is his wrist, and he can play, and you might be able to hear this without it cutting out. Well, that's just me doing that, but Ringo on Act Naturally was constantly through the whole song,
Hmm.
2 minutes and I don't know 20 seconds or whatever it was. No second takes, no editing, no anything. It was just straight through. Never dropped that beat, never missed a step, and that's really hard to do. And as I mentioned in my article, I was having a conversation with Pete Thomas, Elvis Costello's drummer, back in 2015, and he was playing at a Beatles tribute show in LA, and he was singing and playing to Act Naturally, and he said, how hard it is to play 96 beats per minute or whatever it is with that constant hi-hat, but faster and steadier for 2 minutes and 20 seconds. That is really hard to do, but Ringo made it sound easy.
That's the thing about a lot of Beatles songs. You think that a lot of the drumming is simple when it's not. It's very misleading. And
Oh yeah, it sounds easy until you have to play it. When you try to go and play it, you think, oh my gosh, that's tough. That's hard to do. It's a special sound that he had.
yeah, the thing is, if you go and you see Beatles tribute bands, you've heard these songs so many times, the Beatles recordings, that when a band is a little bit off and they're not playing exactly what the Beatles played, you can notice the difference. And I
Oh
notice it
yeah,
more with the drummer that I seem to with the other musicians in the band.
yeah. I mean, there's just so many of Ringo's drum fills and drum licks are a signature part of the Beatles sound.
Hmm.
You know, you couldn't imagine, for example, Come Together being played any other way than the way Ringo plays it. And
Hmm.
that's one of my favorite. That's one of my favorite songs when Let It Be plays our band. That's one of my favorite songs to play is Come Together. It's just a really cool vibe, really cool feel, and a lot of tom toms. And Ringo has been quoted as saying Abbey Road is tom tom madness. Because he
Yep.
had just gotten a new set of drums with calfskin heads and wanted to show them off. So tom toms everywhere, all over Abbey Road, and it's a really cool sound.
Yeah. And isn't the drum part from Come Together very difficult to play?
Well, it is if you try to play it exactly like Ringo, because Ringo was a left-hander
Hmm.
playing a right-handed setup. So he was going from the floor tom to the rack tom. So when it had that little fill, I don't know if you want me to try to do it.
Go ahead.
If it'll sound, but I do it like this. I do it going from right to left because that's natural for a right-hander.
Hmm.
Ringo would go from the floor tom to the rack tom, which is you can't really do that if you're a right-hander because you're crossing your hands over, and it just you lose that extra beat that you need, and it's tough. So that's what made his drumming so unique, was that he was a lefty playing a right-handed kit. And I'm not sure if you could hear what I just did or not, if it cut out, but anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and isn't it difficult to keep strict time with that drum part of his to do it in perfect time every time?
Well, every song, it's difficult to, especially when there's fills involved, because a lot of drummers tend to rush the fills. And I've been guilty of that from time to time. My bandmates would certainly tell you. But it's just a matter of the feel. And Ringo was really as opposed to being super technically proficient, he was more of a feel kind of guy. So if Come Together was rushed a little bit, but it doesn't sound like it did. But if it was, it had that feel and it had that groove that just made it a really cool song.
Hmm. Yeah, this is one of those moments where a musician's part makes so much of a difference in the song. I mean, the
Oh yeah,
songs
I mean,
themselves, Beatles songs are strong just by themselves, which explains why there's so many cover versions of Beatles songs. But it's hard to imagine Come Together without Ringo's part. Same thing with Paul's bass line. It's so much an integral part of the song.
oh yeah, you couldn't imagine hearing the song any other way, and when you do, it's kind of strange. Aerosmith had a hit with Come Together, I think in the late '70s,
Hmm.
and their drummer played the part, pretty close to the same way that Ringo played it.
Right.
Because you don't want to deviate from that too much, because then you're messing with the song, and you don't want people to mess with Beatles songs too much. It never seems to work out, at least in my opinion.
Yeah. I'm just curious, have you heard the new recording of Drum Together?
I have not.
Okay, this is a new charity record that has just been released, and it's got like over 100 drummers on it, Ringo being one of them. And apparently Jim Keltner asked him to take part in it. But all the big names you can think of, Max Weinberg, Kenny Aronoff, you name it, they're on this record. And it becomes a jazz arrangement of the song. But it's
Oh,
pretty cool that this has just come out, and clever to use the title Drum Together, obviously
right.
doing Come Together, but it's all being done for Why Hunger. And I'll put a link in our description box if people want to check it out. But yeah, uh, great idea. All
Yeah, great
for
idea, and it sounds like a great cause too. I'll have to check it out. Although it does kind of remind me of what's that? Well, it's actually not a joke, but well, it sort of is. What do you get when you have 100 drummers playing a song?
what
99 drummers too many? I don't know. I'm fine with just Ringo playing Come Together, but obviously if it's a it's a charity thing, then good on them. That's a great cause to support. Help end
Yeah,
hunger for sure.
the cause is more important, really.
Of course.
Um, Also, you had to put A Day in the Life in there, which I think everybody would put in their top 10 list when it comes to Ringo's drumming. In your own words, why that one?
Yeah. Well, again, a lot of the fills on that one just sort of came out of left field. I mean, a lot of songs you can kind of anticipate where drummers are going to go, at least somewhat. But in A Day in the Life, he was just, I don't know where they were coming from. Um, but a lot of his fills on the toms, especially, were just sort of, you know, way out of left field and just different timing and different things and just very inventive
Hmm.
and really helped drive that song, particularly as it came, to the crescendo parts. And then going into the simple 4/4 of the woke up, got out of bed section is a nice contrast. So, 1 minute he's steady Ringo on the woke up, got out of bed, and then the next minute, everything is kind of exploding and going crazy, and he's all over the tom, is just going nuts, and it was really cool.
Yeah. How much of your appreciation for Ringo's drumming on a song like A Day in the Life do you attribute to the drumming alone as opposed to all the different, mic techniques at the time and where you place the mic with the drums? And this was at a time when drum heads were loosened, and you had a thicker, fuller sound. I kind of miss that sound a lot in Ringo's drumming nowadays. It's very
Yeah,
crisp
well,
and very bright on his more recent stuff, but you don't have that really full, rich sound like even later on, Back Off Boogaloo to me has that kind of a sound. But
right.
yeah. So how do you feel about that? I mean, so much of the experience of listening to A Day in the Life can come from the technology and how much it advanced and all the improvements they were making and the innovation from, say, what Jeff Emerick was doing at the time.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to mention Jeff Emerick. I
Yeah.
saw him speak about a year before he passed at a convention here in California, and he had mentioned they took the bottom head off of the floor tom and
Hmm.
put a mic right up in there to get that really close miking sound. And like you said, it was a very kind of boomy, dynamic sort of sound, which really fit the song. And you don't hear stuff like that anymore. Well, you don't hear a lot of real drums anymore, unfortunately.
Hmm.
Um, but when you do, you don't hear a lot of sort of inventive miking techniques like people used to do. Everything kind of tends to sound samey. But again, that goes back to the band pushing the envelope and their producer pushing the envelope, their engineers pushing the envelope, and always kind of searching for new sounds and new ways to get the music across. And yeah, I miss that too because every Beatles record, particularly as you get towards the 67 through 69 period, the drums sound a little bit different.
Hmm.
Sergeant Pepper sounds different than the White Album. Abbey Road sounds different than the White Album and Sergeant Pepper. So, it's definitely something to listen for. Something the average listener might not really care about or not really notice. But, if you start to pick out those different parts, you know, John's rhythm guitar, George's lead, Ringo's drumming, Paul's bass playing, then you realize, yeah, the drums don't sound the same. They're a little drier on the White Album, for example. Abbey Road, as I mentioned earlier, tom toms everywhere, tom tom madness.
Hmm.
Sergeant Pepper, you have the close miking technique and just all sorts of different things going on there. So, always stuff to listen for. And that's one of the things I love about the Beatles is that, been listening to this music for what, over 50 years. I always learn something new every time I listen to a song. Wow, I didn't notice that. Or, wow, I wonder how they did that. Or, well, I really like to listen to that isolated track and hear how that was achieved. So it's always kind of a learning experience, and it's exciting to me.
It's so amazing. It's such a compressed period of time. And within that short period of time, they created so much amazing music and they put so much work into these songs. I mean, you were talking about, packing 2 minutes uh, into a Beatles song with so many, incredible elements. I always talk about And Your Bird Can Sing. It's like, 2 minutes of Nirvana. There's so
Yeah,
much that they put into those short 2 minutes, and it's wonderful. Imagine if a day in the life the drums were mic'd the same way as, say, the Please Please Me album, and they have a different experience altogether
yeah.
from
It,
listening to
it,
it.
it would
So
sound completely different. But
yeah,
yeah, it's, even on something like And Your Bird Can Sing, which John always considered a throwaway, that
yeah,
track just cooks all the way through. The dual lead guitars, the riff, Ringo's drumming. Again, you can really hear the hi-hat. It's that whole compressed sound, like the rest of the Revolver album.
uh-huh.
It's just a great rock and roll song.
I know. They gave you so much in just 2 minutes. Paul's bass line is great in there.
Oh yeah,
So
and then thinking of how much they evolved in such a short period of time. You know, in 1964 they were doing "I Want to Hold Your Hand." 1967 they're doing "A Day in the Life."
mhm.
That's 3 years, less than 3 years, and it's like to think how they went from here to here in that short a period of time is nothing short of incredible.
It's mind-boggling. And as I've said it probably in some of these videos, if you took a brand new Beatle fan and you had him listen to this music and you played Love Me Do and then you played Tomorrow Never Knows, he would
Right,
never think it's the same band.
right, yeah, you would, yeah. I mean, and that's why bands like Herman's Hermits and Dave Clark Five, you know, had some hits and then sort of fell by the wayside. Well, first of all, they weren't writing their own material for the
Hmm.
for the most part, and second of all, they weren't able to evolve. They weren't able to change their sound. They weren't able to go to that next level like the Beatles were. So many bands were unable to do
Right. Okay. I want to mention the next song, which I'm very pleased that you put in there because I don't know if everybody would point to this one for Ringo's drumming, and that's Hello Goodbye.
yeah, again, a lot of those fills, you don't really pay attention to them because they're not necessarily the focus of the song. Um, but if you listen to that little bridge part, the instrumental bridge, again, he's from the snare to the toms, and he's just doing all these sort of crazy, wacky fills. And again, no one's fills sound like Ringo because of the whole lefty on a righty kit thing. Um, but the fills on Hello Goodbye, you know, it's one of his trademarks because it moves the song along. The fills are really cool, but they're not showy. It's not Keith Moon going nuts on his kit, and
Mhm.
it's very kind of almost understated, but very powerful, and that's a pretty cool trick to be able to achieve. And I think Hello Goodbye was, again, I don't think there's any other song where his drums sound that way.
Well, I think every now and then understated would be the appropriate word. You put in your list something, and for years I didn't recognize how great the drumming was on that song. But especially the part "You're Telling Me Will My Love Grow," his
Yeah, the
drumming on
bridge.
that,
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
yeah, and I
It's
believe I believe that was multi-tracked because I think he's doing something on the hi-hat, that portion. I don't know if you could hear that or not, but
yeah,
tickety tickety tick thing. And then he's also doing, going from left to right, from the floor tom to the rack tom at the same time. And I might be imagining this, but I thought I saw something where maybe Paul was doing the hi hat while Ringo was doing the fills. I don't know. I might be totally wrong, but I seem to have read that somewhere or seen it somewhere. But
hmm,
either way, it's a pretty cool achievement because there's so many different parts to that song. It's during George's guitar solo, Ringo's kind of really laid back on the ride cymbal, but he's doing the fills on the toms. Again, serving the song, understated, not flashy, not showy, just perfect.
yeah. If anybody else had drummed to that song, I would have a very different feel, and probably not nearly as effective.
Yeah,
So that's part of the magic of Ringo as a drummer.
yeah. Knowing what to play and knowing what not to play. Sometimes knowing what not to play is just as important as knowing what to play. Because if you do too much, then the focus is on you as the drummer where it shouldn't be. It should be on the song or the lead vocalist or the lead guitar or whatever. But yeah, unless it's a drum solo, which Ringo hated, the focus should not be on the drummer.
Right. Yeah. And when I spoke with, Billy Amendola, I like to bring up the fact that sometimes, like you said, it's when not to play, when to leave space, because that
Right.
creates a certain atmosphere in the song.
Yeah.
So,
And, I look at, we were talking about something and going back to the guitar solo, there's a lot of space in the drums on there. He's letting George's solo speak while he just sort of accents it a little bit with a few fills on the two toms, and it's perfect, just what the song needed.
he knows when to enter, he knows when to stay back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the really cool thing about Ringo, and this is another quote that I read somewhere, is that he never said, okay, we're recording this song, 16 bars in, I'm going to do a fill, and then after that, I'm going to do this. He goes, I just did what I felt when it was time to play. If it felt like the song needed this here, I would do it. If I felt like it didn't need it, I wouldn't do it. So he never planned things out. It was just sort of all relatively spontaneous for a lot of the stuff, which is pretty incredible too.
And you can tell when you listen to outtakes of Beatles songs that he'll play his part in a similar way, but there's always something a little bit different each time he plays it.
Right.
So it's never
Right.
exactly
it's never
the same.
way. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's part of his drumming genius, really. I mean, and even just little things that a lot of people don't notice, like on "From Me to You," for example. There's some really cool fills from the rack tom to the snare, going into the choruses. It's pretty amazing and really hard to replicate. But he was a master at doing that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Were there other drummers that were close in style to Ringo at that time that were doing what he was doing?
Not
It certainly
really.
didn't have the strongest material in the world, like having the Beatles catalog to back it up. But
Right. Well, there were obviously a lot of strong drummers in the '60s during that time, but they all sort of had their own style. But I think, if any drummer really who plays rock music tells you they weren't inspired in some way by Ringo and his style, they're probably lying. You know, Charlie Watts, of course, had the jazz background, so he was probably more influenced by jazz musicians. Um, Keith Moon was probably, who knows, influenced by amphetamines. I have no idea. He was just kind of a wild man, all over everything. But I think everyone who ever sits behind a kit owes a debt to Ringo and his style. There were other great drummers. Drummers for bands like the Searchers and the Hollies. They were very solid too. But nobody quite like Ringo.
Okay, totally agree. You mentioned "I Feel Fine."
Yeah, I was mentioning that earlier. One of his signature, kind of his calling card, and I can't do this. I can try to replicate it, see if you can hear it. But when he was playing with Rory Storm and the Hurricanes before he joined the Beatles, Ringo was seen as the top drummer on the Liverpool scene back then. And one of the things the Beatles loved about his playing was that he could play that little cymbal part that runs throughout Ray Charles' "What Did I Say?" And it's the same thing that he plays on "I Feel Fine." Now I can do it like this, and let me know if you can hear it or not.
A little bit of cutout, but
Yeah, so it's kind of the. I was doing it with two hands. Ringo did it with one, and again, that's all about having that really supple wrist where he can just and just do it really, really quickly. And again, to do that through an entire song is a pretty amazing feat. I don't know if he did that when they did it live, probably because he couldn't hear. But he did do it during the recording, and it's difficult. At least it is for me.
okay. Yeah, I've heard Paul talk about I feel fine and taking that from what did I say?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ticket to Ride is another one, which
Yeah,
you
and
you
that
know
was
you
something.
you,
That was
you
one where, obviously it was Ringo on the drums. Paul suggested that part to Ringo. And the thing that I find cool about it is that the part changes during the song. I mean, you think it's always, so that's how it starts. But then, and I don't even know if I can, but towards the second half of the song, he's a little bit faster going to the toms than he is earlier in the song. And it's a subtle shift, and I'm not even sure if it was intentional, but it's there. And
hmm,
and again, there was nobody doing that kind of stuff, whether Paul suggested it or not. Ringo had to actually sit and play it, and there was no one doing that kind of stuff. The other Beatles would suggest stuff to Ringo, and he laughed about it. There have been interviews where he said, John or Paul or George wanted me to play a certain way or play a certain thing and play it like this song, or that song. And Ringo would say, but there's two drummers on that song. There's two people playing percussion on that song.
right.
And they say, I don't care, just do it. So they expected a lot out of him, and hey, he delivered. So, but
They
yeah, that
expected a lot
was
out of everybody.
right,
They
right.
expected so much out of George Martin, you
Oh,
know.
yeah, George Martin, the engineers, it was pretty much, here's what we want to do, make it work. But we can't. I don't want to hear, but we can't. Just make it work. And either they made it work, or they found a workaround that was just as interesting, if not more so.
Yeah, it's
John wanted to sound like in Tomorrow Never Knows. He wanted to sound like the Dalai Lama at the top of a hill, singing through a speaker. And I'm not sure what that sounds like, but it's probably something similar to what he sounded like on Tomorrow Never Knows. So
right.
yeah, it's
He
just
wanted to,
non-stop inventiveness every step of the way through the career, from the beginning to the end, whether it was the songwriting, the producing, the engineering, the playing. It was, yeah,
it's
never
reminding
stopped
me
creating.
when John said to George Martin for being for the benefit of Mr. Kite, I want to smell the sawdust on the floor.
Right,
Right.
right.
So how do you translate that into sound?
Well, I think LSD helps. Well, I think I wouldn't know.
Hmm.
Um, it's just sort of, well, now they would say, I want to feel that circus vibe. It's kind of the same thing. I
Hmm.
smell the sawdust on the floor. I want to feel like I'm at the circus. So make it sound, bring in the calliope and bring in everything else. And George Martin, for a lot of people, really underrated part of the Beatles sound. A lot of people don't underrate them, obviously, but some people do. They think it was all just the four Beatles in the studio. It's like, no, they had a lot of great people working with them to achieve
And
it.
like you said, you continue to learn more and more about them. And especially with all these box sets that have come out, and when you hear some of the orchestrations that George Martin was responsible for, that you kind of took for granted, or it was very understated, the strings on something. You're so caught up
Right?
in the song that you don't really hear the strings all that much.
Yeah,
So, but it was a vital part of the overall recording. And yeah, constantly learning.
yeah. And now that's a relatively easy, or at least an easier thing to do, because you have synthesizers that can play those string parts.
Hmm.
Back then, you had to bring in a string section. You had to score that. You had to record it properly. It's a lot of factors went into making these songs the little jewels that they are.
And the scoring itself was a work of art. You had to
Sure.
learn how to do that to know what each instrument should play. And George Martin had that background. I
Yeah.
had heard a bootleg of White Album stuff, and just hearing the horn section for Martha, My Dear. Nobody
Hmm.
ever talks about that.
Right.
Somebody had to score that, and that was
Yeah.
George Martin. So,
Just little bits and pieces you don't think about, but they're there, kind of bubbling under the surface. And that's how I feel about Ringo's drumming. So many little bits and pieces in almost every song, um, where he's, go back to that phrase, pushing the envelope, trying something different,
Hmm.
not just doing the straight 4/4 beat. You know, he could have
Yeah.
done "Come Together" just doing that 4/4 the whole way through and not done the fills he was doing, but those fills make that song or help to make that song.
Yeah. Um, we're going to talk about something that whenever I discuss drumming with Ringo, I like to bring this up. So I'm going to get your take on it because one of the songs you mentioned here is "Here Comes the Sun," and there are certain songs, especially in the Lennon camp, that have a lot of different time signature changes. And how difficult is that for a drummer to adjust to? I've heard different answers for this because a song like, well, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds changes in time signature. So does Good Morning, Good Morning. Happiness is a Warm Gun, you
Oh yeah.
know, and I remember talking with a couple of drummers about this, that with a song like Happiness is a Warm Gun, you don't think to yourself, this is in 7/16 time and 9/8 time. You just play what you feel. You
Right.
don't really get caught up in all of that. So as a drummer, how do you relate to different time signature changes?
Well, a lot of them are integral parts of the song. Happiness is a warm gun, particularly when it goes to that, the second part of sort of the trilogy or whatever you want to call it. Um, I'm not sure if that was intentional, where the kind of the beat changes. But I've seen Beatle tribute bands, really well respected Beatle tribute bands, completely screw that song up. At least the drummer completely, because he can't get that timing down. It's not an easy thing. But if you study things enough, you're able to at least get close enough to it. Here Comes the Sun is an interesting case where it goes to that. I think it's a maybe 5/4. The sun, sun, sun. Here it comes.
Hmm.
And then in the middle of those, he's doing all these different fills, and it's mind blowing. But then you come back to the straight 4/4 again, going into the last verse,
Right.
and it's challenging. I mean, doing that kind of stuff is challenging as a drummer, for any musician actually. But it's a challenge that's a lot of fun. And again, it's kind of thing that made the Beatles the amazing musicians that they were. They didn't just play everything straight. They were constantly looking to tweak, do things just a little bit differently.
Right. They didn't know technically what they were doing
Right.
necessarily. They just played by feel, whatever
Oh yeah.
felt right to them.
And that's what that, like I was saying earlier, Ringo is totally a play by feel drummer, and that never failed him. It still doesn't fail him. When he played a couple of songs with Paul McCartney at Dodger Stadium, Paul's last concert, 2019. Abe Laboriel was doing a lot of the heavy lifting on some of the songs, but you can still see Ringo throwing some fills in there. And I'm like, yeah. Of course, all eyes are on Ringo at that time, Ringo and Paul.
Hmm.
No one's looking at the rest of the band. I was just staring at Ringo, going, yeah, I wonder what he's going to do here. And it was like, even though they had never played Helter Skelter live as a band, the Beatles, Ringo was playing along, and he knew where a fill was going to come, and he did one. And it was just fun. It was fun to see that.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. All right. The last song that you mentioned was "She Loves You."
Yeah, just a really thrilling example of their early sound. And another one of Ringo's signature moves was the sort of the not quite all the way open, but the very swishy sounding hi hat, which he achieved by keeping the hi hat open a little bit, and as opposed to hitting the hi hat with the tip of his sticks, he would sort of do this, swish back and forth, and kind of gave it that sort of really powerful driving sound that he used on songs like "She Loves You" and other ones from that era. "It Won't Be Long" is another one that comes to mind. Another one of my favorites. Um, but yeah, it's got the powerful beginning. It starts off on the toms, and then the sort of staccato beat, and then he, goes into the swishy hi-hat, and, it's just perfection from beginning to end. He just drives that song.
Had other drummers done that before with the swishy hi-hat sound?
In 1963, I was not aware of any, going backwards and listening to stuff now. I had never heard it before.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure how he came up with that. If it was an accident, or because, on Love Me Do, of course, he certainly wasn't doing that. That was more of a closed hi-hat, tick, 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 tick thing. Then on Please Please Me, which would have been their next symbol, he was pretty much on the ride cymbal for the verses and the choruses, if I remember correctly. So, I'm not sure if he invented it per se, but I don't remember ever hearing it before Ringo.
Interesting.
It just sort of helped the songs kind of sound really electric. Because, if you're playing with the closed hi-hat, it sounds very dry. But if you've got the hi-hat open a little bit, and the amps are blaring and the guitars you're jamming, and you're, swish back and forth, it just adds to the overall energy of the sound.
I agree. I'm always curious to know what the Beatles did first, and sometimes it's hard, unless you know the entire history of music and what happened before the Beatles,
Right.
to give them
I mean,
credit for everything. So
it's possible someone like Cliff Richard was, doing that. Cliff Richard and the Shadows, but I don't know. I had never heard it before personally.
okay. Are there any songs from Ringo's solo career that you would cite as being among your favorite of his drumming moments?
Two of the earlier ones are favorites of mine. It Don't Come Easy has a really cool groove to it. And has some really cool parts in it as well. And then Back Off Boogaloo, where he sort of does that shuffle. Kind of does, and then that's that way kind of through the whole song. And that's really cool because I remember seeing a video interview he did with Dave Stewart from the Eurythmics, where he talks about that song, and the reason why he played the snare like that was because whoever was producing wanted him to do something on the bass drum he wasn't able to do. So instead of doing that on the bass drum, he said, "Well, I'm just going to do this instead." And it's what Ringo called a happy accident.
Right.
So it was because he couldn't do something, which led to him doing something else, which suited the song perfectly.
Yeah, well, that was George Harrison who made the suggestion, since he produced the record. But I could have sworn that George wanted him to do something on the toms that he couldn't do, and that's why, he decided to use a snare, and that part is what came into his head, what worked for him.
Right. Yeah, I think I had heard that it was the bass drum, but it was something he wasn't able to achieve, and that led to the signature sound on that song.
Yeah. Okay, this has been great. Why don't we just mention a few more things, just so people are more aware of your recent book, The Beatles 100, 100 Pivotal Moments in Beatles History. I talked about, I think, 10 of them when I had you on just recently. I wanted to bring up a few more that were mentioned here. And you also cover, it's not just the Beatles, it's all the solo careers as well. But the Lost Weekend period from John and the rock and roll sessions. And why do you consider that to be one of the pivotal moments?
Well, it was actually something that helped bring John eventually back to Yoko. He was so lost at that time that I think she saw that, because she knew what was going on in LA when she was in New York. She knew what John was doing in LA. She had a sort of a pipeline, people feeding her information. So, that kind of helped bring him back to her. That's one of the things. But it was, he was a very public figure at that time. He was doing a lot of radio appearances, to promote Walls and Bridges and to promote rock and roll. There were a lot of interviews around that, 74 or 75 era. He hadn't done, that many earlier or after until Double Fantasy came out. So he was sort of out there a little bit more. So I think, I think overall it was important to list that as, being part of the overall Beatles story. It was also where he sort of, got back together with Paul, at least on a friendship basis. They hung out a little bit here in LA. There's that famous night they spent in the studio here in Los Angeles with Stevie Wonder and
Right.
who, God knows who else doing God knows what. But, the music wasn't great. But, just the fact that he was hanging out with Paul again and they were friendly and they were having discussions, I'm sure you've heard that there were plans afoot for John to go to New Orleans when Wings was recording Venus and Mars, before John got back with Yoko, and then when he got back with Yoko, those plans got canceled. But just sort of all this stuff was going on a little bit behind the scenes, and I thought it was a very important story to tell, and then John working with Phil Spector and all the craziness that entails was interesting as well to me.
It's an interesting period because, sometimes when people say the Lost Weekend, I think it gets a little distorted what you consider to be the Lost Weekend. Is it strictly when John was in LA or just
Right,
when John was away from Yoko? Because Walls and Bridges was recorded in New York,
right,
and so if you're looking at that time period of what he did in LA, he did the rock and roll sessions, and only 4 of those songs ended up, the ones with Phil Spector, on the rock and roll album.
right.
Later on they came out, as bonus tracks and all. But apart from that, you've got the Pussycats album, you've got Ringo working with John on the Goodnight Vienna album, Fame with David Bowie around that time. And I guess you'd have to put into the whole equation that he wrote the songs from Walls and Bridges
Hmm.
at that time. But some people may not look at that as a very prolific time,
Right.
overall when he was away from Yoko. But with you, it's more the outcome of, what happened after all that. That's more significant, I suppose.
Right. It was because of what happened after that. Because even though he wasn't prolific, he was still working. He was still doing stuff.
Hmm.
And like the Pussycats album, producing and doing things. So um, he was still out there creating, and it might not have been the best period for him personally, uh, but professionally, he didn't suffer too much. The Walls and Bridges album has some great stuff on it. He was writing it during that period.
Right.
So his
Plus,
only what is his only number one single during his career was from Walls and Bridges. So there you go.
which reminds me of working with Elton John and also doing Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds with him.
Right, right.
So, you know, he did a decent amount during that time, but I
Yeah.
I wouldn't consider it a very prolific time. So
No, it
it's
wasn't prolific, and it was more of a lost weekend personally than professionally.
hmm, okay. Also, I got to bring this up because you may not know that Living in the Material World is my favorite album of all time from anybody.
Wow.
So you mentioned that as a pivotal moment. Why would you say that?
Well, just because it was really George's first album of quote unquote new material, because a lot of the All Things Must Pass songs were written during his time with the Beatles. They were demoed during the Let It Be sessions or Abbey Road sessions. So this was George really technically his first new album as a solo artist, really. As
Mm,
far as brand new material that was relatively freshly written. So it was very important for him, and some great tracks on that album. Of course, "Give Me Love" was the huge hit. Um, but there is another song on "Living in the Material World" itself is a very good song, and you don't hear a lot of people talk about that when it comes to George's signature tunes. But I love that one.
mhm.
And there's another one on there, like I don't have the album in front of me. I can't think of the title right off the top of my head. But
Well,
another one I think was scheduled to be a single, but was pulled back at the last minute. Should have been a single. you'll probably be able to tell me what that was.
Don't let me wait too long.
That's the one. Yeah. Should have been a single. Why it wasn't, why it was pulled back, I have no idea. I'm sure there were business reasons for doing it with Apple. But yeah, that to me was a surefire, another top 40 single would have been a great follow up to Give Me Love. So there were some really good moments on that album. I think it could have been produced a little bit better, but the material is pretty strong, I think.
Well, I obviously think it's strong if it's my favorite, but
Right.
I don't know if I'd go so far as to call it his first real solo album, because quite a lot of All Things Must Pass was written in 1970, after, the physical breakup of the
Right.
Beatles. And, that's true that quite a lot still came from the Beatles era. Even Art of Dying and Isn't It a Pity dates back to 1966.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, and some of the songs were rehearsed during the Let It Be sessions,
Hmm.
but still there was quite a lot that came out afterwards.
Oh, sure.
Um,
Well, I guess what I meant was not really his first real solo album, but the first album where I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, all the songs were freshly written for that album, as opposed to it having been around for a while.
okay, well, you
But
could say try some, buy some.
I think it was a very important step for him because he had to prove that he wasn't a one-trick pony.
Hmm.
This was the follow-up to one of the most commercially successful albums of the decade. So he had to really prove himself, especially being sort of the second banana to John and Paul. A lot of people were looking at him saying, well, can he do it again? And he did.
Yeah, good point. And I would definitely say, you're not that crazy about the last four songs on the album, but to me they're gems, and That Is All to me is possibly his greatest love song,
Mm,
in his solo career. And sometimes I might even say it's better than Something. It's
wow.
that beautiful a song for me anyway. I'm just
High
saying.
praise indeed.
Yes. All right. One more thing I will bring up, and that is Paul's collaborating with Elvis Costello, which you cite as being a pivotal moment. Um, is it because you're an Elvis Costello fan, or is it because you think that the songs they wrote together were really strong?
I think it really kind of kick-started the second phase of Paul's solo career. I mean, honestly, Press to Play, I'm not a huge fan of, Press to Play, I'm not a huge fan of that album. It was one of his least commercially successful records of the decade, and I think he did Spies Like Us around that same time,
Hmm.
and then didn't do anything for 3 or 4 years, and then so I think he needed a little bit of juice to get him back in the game. And I think working with Elvis sort of gave him that foil. Everyone mentioned Elvis was the John Lennon sort of counterpoint to Paul, um, and he was in a way. But I think working with Paul caused Paul to sort of maybe say to himself, maybe subconsciously, I need to up my game a little bit here. So I think some of the songs on Flowers in the Dirt are some of the best tracks that song wise that Paul has ever done in his solo career. My Brave Face is a great song. You One or Two, just some really, really solid tracks on that album. And, Elvis had a lot to do with that.
Mm.
But yes, I am also an Elvis fan.
So more so than, say, Paul writing with Denny Lane or writing with Eric Stewart? You think more
Yeah,
highly?
I think this brought, the craftsmanship went up kind of one or two more rungs on the ladder, I think, when Elvis joined in. And it might have been the timing, that might have been part of it. The fact that Paul was kind of in the doldrums a little bit, and then this sort of helped pull him out of it. But the songs that they recorded, even the one that didn't end up on Flowers in the Dirt, some of the ones that ended up on Costello's albums, like Veronica, and then a few ended up on Paul's Off the Ground album. Those are really strong as well. So, and then some of the demos like Tommy's Coming Home and 20 Fine Fingers. Those are great songs too. And I think Paul realizes it because he reached out to Elvis at one point and said, we really need to finish these songs, these demos one day that we didn't finish during those sessions. So
Hmm.
I think Paul realizes it too.
Yeah, I love the whole box set that came out for Flowers with two different sets of demos,
Yep,
which is a great idea. Just Paul and Elvis on one, Paul and the band on the
yep.
other. But Paul and Elvis together sounded so good,
Yeah, it was
especially,
just sort of a natural thing, and it made you wish they would have done more together.
well, I wonder if that ever might happen again.
Yeah, you
It's
never
always
know.
possible. You never know with him. Yeah. But I am a big fan of Press to Play, just in case, you
Right.
know.
I think I remember that. So,
Yeah. And I did love his collaborating with Eric Stewart as well, but that's for another show. But
yep.
speaking of Elvis Costello, you were involved with this compilation here. There was a 3 CD package called Beyond Belief, a tribute to Elvis Costello. You actually play with your band, Pop Dudes, on one of the songs here. And it's all Elvis Costello material. There's even a couple of covers of Costello McCartney songs. You've
Right.
got Veronica on here, and I think So Like Candy.
Yes.
And why don't you tell the folks about this? And is this still available?
It is still available. It was released on a Texas-based label, Spider Pop Records, Spyderpop.
Hmm.
And I think if you go to their website, you can find it there. They also have a lot of other great stuff on that label, so I would definitely recommend checking them out. But all the proceeds from that album, Spider Pop generously donated to the Mr. Holland's Opus Foundation, which provides musical instruments for children in underserved areas of the country. So I went down to a middle school not long after this was released in 2015, a middle school in Southern California where we were able to donate $5,000 worth of musical instruments, brand new musical instruments, to the children at this school. And we were able to watch them play these instruments. And just seeing, that tangible evidence of how this made a difference was very, very powerful. So for that reason, I'm very, very proud of Beyond Belief, but also very proud of the fact that, there's some really great tracks on there and some really great artists. Um, Paul Myers is the gentleman who did So Like Candy.
Hmm.
Paul has written a lot of really, he's a big Beatles fan too, but he's written a lot of great books. He wrote a biography of Todd Rundgren. He's written a book about the television show The Kids in the Hall. He's also co-edited a few books about power pop music, which coincidentally, same publisher, Rare Bird Books, who released the Beatles 100, they released those two power pop books, Go All the Way and Go Further. So Paul's an author, but he's also an accomplished musician, and it's great to have him do So Like Candy. Did a great job on it. But there's other cool people on there as well. Matthew Sweet is on there.
Hmm.
Nick Hayward from Haircut 100 does a really beautiful version of Almost Blue. And a lot of indie pop rock artists are on there as well. And so very, very proud of it. So yes, it is still available and it's a great deal. 50 tracks, and was proud to be co-executive producer.
Yeah, and I'll put the link up if people want to purchase this.
Thank you.
Yeah, and speaking of power pop, since you're such a big fan and a maven of it, we should have you on, once in a while here to talk about, bands that were heavily influenced by the Beatles, very
Oh
Beatle
yeah,
stuff. And you even have a chapter in your book, The Beatles 100, where you mention a few of those,
right.
the Sponge Tones and, the Weaklings and, a
Yep.
bunch of others, and get some of our fans watching the show into those groups as well. It's a whole
There's
other
a lot
world
of them.
there,
There's a lot that are well known, like Badfinger and Raspberries, and
right?
there are some that are more under the radar, like Sponge Tones, and you mentioned the Weaklings, and even Todd Rundgren in Utopia. Had a great album called "Deface the Music" in 1980, where they did Beatles influenced tunes, and of course there was the Ruddles, which I'm sure your viewers
Yeah,
are all familiar with. So lots of great stuff. Yeah.
yeah. And I actually interviewed Todd. It's quite a while back now, probably around 2015, all about his Beatle connections and talking about Deface the Music and how that all came about. So
Love it.
that's a great interview from his home in Hawaii on the phone. We did an interview there. So in fact, I'll put up a link for that for all the Todd fans. But
Great.
this has been great, John. And This channel can be your home anytime you want it to be. And please keep me posted of all your activities, new articles that you're writing for Goldmine, anything that's Beatle related, certainly. And thanks for coming on.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to chat with you and talk about the Beatles. I can, talk about them all day and all night. So I love it. Thanks for
Now
having
that's a kink show.
me. That's right. Sorry, my bad.
All right. So thanks for coming on and teaching us about Ringo's drumming this time. And hopefully we'll do it again real soon.
Sounds good. Peace and
Thanks.
love.
Peace and love. And thanks to all of you for watching. And please subscribe and we'll catch you soon. Take care.